Hello everyone. This video is about the applications of Haccp in food safety. So we will be seeing in detail what exactly is Haccp and its applications in ensuring food safety in food industries. Coming to the introduction, Haccp is a management system in which food safety is addressed through the analysis and control of biological, chemical, and physical hazards from raw material production, procurement, and handling to manufacturing, distribution, and consumption of the finished product. For successful implementation of a Haccp plan, the management should be strongly committed towards the Haccp concept. Also, a firm commitment to Haccp by the top management provides company employees with a sense of the importance of producing safe food. So Haccp was first established in the year 1960 by NASA in order to ensure safe food for the astronauts, and it was adopted from Codex Alimentarius Commission. And Haccp is a science-based and a systematic system which identifies the specific hazard in the various manufacturing steps as well as throughout the production of food, and then it provides the measures for controlling to ensure safety of the food. This particular system, Haccp system, focuses more on prevention rather than relying on the end product testing, which we see in quality control. So this focuses more on prevention. So Haccp is a tool which identifies the various hazards in a food processing condition, and it can be applied throughout the food chain from primary product to final consumption. So what exactly is Haccp? So Haccp or HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, and HACCP is a system which looks for and prevents potential problems before they happen. So that is why I said it is a preventive tool rather than focusing on the end product testing. So Haccp may be used by food companies to make sure they do not break the law by putting consumers at risk when producing the food. And it is a structured approach to risk assessment, and it focuses on prevention rather than end product testing. So by implementing a Haccp system in a organization which is associated with manufacturing of food, it will help the inspection by the regulatory authorities and also helps to promote the standard to international level by increasing the confidence in the food safety. Now, all the food businesses that are involved in manufacturing food products have a legal responsibility to produce safe food. So, in case if they break the law, they will be facing various punishments such as improvement notice, prohibition notice, even prosecution. So basically, improvement notice is a fixed time period which is set for the company to rectify the problems. It could be 1 month or 2 months as per the regulatory body. Then then there is another called prohibition notices. Prohibition notices, the company won't be allowed to permit or won't be permitted to produce particular food item for a period of time, and even prosecution is possible as a punishment for breaking the law. Now, if we see what and all HACCP is involved, so it involved or involves with identifying points during the production of a product where the potential hazards may occur. Then it also analyzes the risk of the hazard points which happens, including the scale of the consequences that can happen. So first, HACCP is involved in analyzing what kind of a risk is associated with. Also, it even analyzes the consequences of that particular risk. Then it decides which points are critical to the consumer safety. Also, it implements controls, monitoring production, and takes action if it is necessary. Haccp also involves reviewing the Haccp plan whenever the food operation is altered, and it can be on a regular basis, for example, annually, or even if there are no alterations that are done, then also there has to be a reviewing. Now, some of the features or the quality of Haccp system is Haccp is a systematic approach. It is efficient as well as it is on the spot. Systematic means it is systematic in identifying the potential hazards. Okay. Then efficient because it concentrates the control effort at the stages where the risk is potentially the highest. Then it is on the spot because the processes can be controlled immediately by the food business, which means that while manufacturing, if it was found that there is a control that has to be applied to prevent that particular hazard, then it can be immediately changed and it can be altered. So that is why it is on the spot and the control can be immediately applied to prevent the hazard. Now, how does Haccp help? So Haccp is a method which food businesses can use to ensure that their products do not put consumers at risk. The risks are like in terms of the hazards we will see. It can be a physical hazard, it can be a chemical hazard, or it can be a microbiological hazard. Then the details of a Haccp system will vary as no two businesses are exactly alike, but their principles are the same because each manufacturing unit have their own set of steps for producing a particular product. So the steps involved is different, but the principle behind this Haccp will be same. So the details of a Haccp system will vary according to the steps that is involved, but the overall principle will be same in all the manufacturing units. Also, this application of a Haccp in a food business or a lab are even compatible to implementing of quality management systems like ISO 9000 series. Now, when we see the term Haccp, we see H stands for hazard. So let us see what exactly is hazard. And we have seen already what is Haccp in the previous uh, class about food safety management. So we'll see once again what exactly is hazard. A hazard is a biological, chemical, or physical agent that is reasonably likely to cause illness or injury in the absence of its control. So in Haccp, the hazards refers to conditions or contaminants in foods that can cause illness or injury. Then there are different types of hazards, that is biological hazards that can be harmful microorganisms, pests, rodents, etc. Then chemical hazards which are either naturally occurring or intentionally added or unintentionally added. And physical hazards can be example glass, stones, or even metals. And even apart from these three categories, that is biological hazards, chemical hazards, and physical hazards, they can be even the packaging quality or equipment reliability become a hazard in a food manufacturing unit. Now, before we go in detail about Haccp, we need to understand what are some of the important terms and the definitions. So first, when we talk about control, control is nothing but all the necessary actions to ensure and maintain compliance with criteria that is established in the Haccp plan. And a control measure is any action and activity that can be used to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Whereas a corrective action is the action that is to be taken when the results of monitoring at the CCP indicate a loss of control. So control measure and corrective action is totally different. And critical limit is a criteria which separates acceptability from unacceptability. And deviation is a failure to meet a critical limit. And flow diagram is a systematic representation of the sequence of steps or operations that are used in the production or manufacturing of a particular food item. Then there are monitoring, validation, and verification as well. So monitoring is the act of conducting a planned sequence of observations or measurements of control parameters to assess whether a CCP is under control. Whereas validation is about obtaining evidence that the elements of the Haccp plan are effective. And verification is a method, the application of methods or procedures or tests or other evaluations in addition to monitoring to determine the compliance with the Haccp plan. So these are some of the important terminologies that will be used frequently when we learn more about the application. So we need to understand what exactly these terminologies meant. Now we'll see what is critical control point. Critical control point is an identifiable point in the production chain where a hazard may occur, and an action has to be taken to prevent the hazard from occurring. So this can either be a point, critical control can be a point, it could be a step or a procedure at which control has to be exerted and is essential in order to prevent or eliminate a hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. So a CCP can be used to control more than one hazard, for example, in case of refrigeration storage. So it can prevent a physical hazard as well as it could be even preventing a microbiological hazard. So alternatively, several CCPs may be needed to control one hazard. So critical control point is the most important step or a particular step in production, or it can be more than one also in the manufacturing of a product, where the chances of a hazard occurring is very high, and if we are not able to exert control at that particular point, then uh, you know we won't be able to prevent that hazard from occurring from the later stages. So if we miss it at that particular stage, then we won't be able to prevent it in the later stages. So this critical control point is very important, and we need to identify which are the critical control points in each of the manufacturing of products. Next, there may be points that may be identified as CCP when the hazards can be prevented. Examples of preventable CCPs are, for example, introduction of chemical residues can be prevented by control at the receiving stage. Then, a chemical hazard may be prevented by control at the formulation or ingredient addition stage. Then, pathogenic bacteria growth may be controlled by refrigeration, storage, or chilling. These are examples of the CCPs which are preventable. Similarly, there are CCPs which can be eliminated. Examples include pathogenic or harmful bacteria may be killed upon cooking. So it is an elimination step. And if we are not able to do that at that particular step, that is like cooking, then we won't be able to kill those pathogenic bacteria. That is what I said, CCP is very important. Then metal fragments can be detected by a metal detector, and it can be eliminated by removing the contaminated product from the processing line. Also, there are parasites that can be killed by freezing. Similarly, also there are points or CCPs where it can be reduced to an acceptable level. Examples include the occurrence of foreign objects can be minimized by manual sorting and automatic collectors, and some biological and chemical hazards can be minimized by obtaining shellfish from approved waters. So now the general guidelines for application of Haccp principles are given in two important uh, areas. That is, first is educating and training, as well as developing a Haccp plan. So when we talk about educating and training, the success of a Haccp system highly depends on the educating and training of the management and employees about the importance of the role in producing safe food. So education and providing training is highly important. Then we need to develop a Haccp plan. So under the Haccp plan, there are various steps that we will be seeing in the coming slides. So the preliminary tasks in the development of the Haccp plan are assembling a Haccp team, describing the food and its distribution, describe the intended use and the consumers of the food. Next point is developing a flow diagram which describes the process, then verify the flow diagram. These are the preliminary steps or tasks in the development of a Haccp plan. Now let us see one by one each steps involved in developing a Haccp plan. First is assembling a Haccp team. So a team should be formed within the management and the team should be from multidisciplinary. They should have some of the individuals from engineering background, production unit, sanitation, quality assurance, microbiology. And then the team should also include certain local personnel who are involved in the operation as they are more familiar with the variability and limitations of the operation. This include the employees which are part of the manufacturing unit line. So they should also be involved in the Haccp team. The next step is describing the food and its distribution. So we need to first, once the team is formed and team is assembled, they are required to describe the food. The team, what is the food, the general description of the food, what are the ingredients used, and the various processing methods that is involved. Then distribution of the food is also to be mentioned, which means whether the food that is prepared is distributed as frozen condition or whether it is in refrigerated condition or at the ambient temperature. So that gives an overall idea about describing the food and its distribution. Then the next step is describe the intended use and consumers of the food. Now, how is it consumed and what are the consumers of the food? So they need to describe the normal expected use of the food and how it has to be used. The intended consumers may be the general public or a particular segment of the population. Example, it can be infants or the product could be for immunocompromised individuals or the elderly. Now, the next step is developing a flow diagram which describes the process. So a flow diagram is nothing but a simple outline of the steps that is involved in the entire process of product manufacturing or any sort of a food processing. So the flow diagram must cover all the steps in the process which are directly under the control of the establishment. Now the flow diagram should be simple and all the people or everyone in the team should understand it clearly. So the one example I have given is the flow diagram for pasteurization of milk. It has clearly given all the steps that is involved in the pasteurization of milk. So this is how a flow diagram should be. Now once the flow diagram is prepared, they need to verify the flow diagram. So how to do that? Perform an on-site review of the operation to verify the accuracy and completeness of the flow diagram. That is nothing but you are just comparing by conducting an on-site review, like whether is any difference from what is there in the flow diagram and what is being conducted in the manufacturing unit. Then modifications should be made to the flow diagram as necessary and documented. And once all these 5 important preliminary tasks have been completed for planning of Haccp, the 7 principles of Haccp has to be applied. Now let us see what are the 7 principles of Haccp. The 7 principles of Haccp include hazard analysis, second, determining the critical control point, third, establishing critical limits, then monitoring of the critical control point, then corrective actions, establishing of verification procedures, and the last one is record keeping procedures. These are the 7 important principles of Haccp and we'll see how it is implemented. The first principle of HACCP is hazard analysis. The first step involves identifying any hazards that must be prevented, eliminated or reduced to acceptable levels. all the potential hazards from the receipt of the raw materials through to release of the finished products must be considered. A hazard must be controlled if it is likely to occur or likely to result in an unacceptable risk to consumers. Next point is, or next principle is determining the critical control point. As we have already seen what is a critical control point, it is easy to understand which are the critical control points in the flow diagram of the product. So identifying the critical control points at the steps at which control is essential to prevent or eliminate a hazard or to reduce it to acceptable levels. So we have to determine or identify the critical control points. Next is establishing critical limits. Once the critical control points are identified, we need to establish critical limits. So critical limit is the maximum or minimum value to which a biological, chemical or physical limit must be controlled at a CCP. So this is set in order to prevent, eliminate or reduce a hazard to an acceptable level. The next principle is critical control point monitoring. So we need to, once the control or critical limits are applied, we need to monitor the CCP. A planned series of observations or measurements need to be taken to assess whether a CCP is within the critical limits. So this also helps to produce an accurate record of future use regarding the verification. The next principle talks about corrective actions. Corrective actions are procedures to be followed when a hazard is identified in food production. The aim is to correct and eliminate the cause of the hazard and bring the CCP back under control. The cause of problem must be identified to prevent future recurrence. Some of the examples of corrective actions include isolating and holding the product for safety evaluation. For example, in a pasteurization of milk, we find that the pasteurization temperature has not reached, or when we do the enzyme test, the alkaline phosphatase, if it is still present, we need to do some corrective action to eliminate it. So this can be by isolating and holding the product for some safety evaluation, or we may even reprocess it by giving the increasing the temperature and ensuring that the product has reached that particular temperature for in case of pasteurization of milk and all that. So isolating and holding product for safety evaluation or diverting the affected product or ingredients to another line where the deviation would not be considered very critical. So as I said, there can be reprocessing, or if there is no chance that we can do a corrective action to bring back the control of about the hazard, then in such a case we have to destroy the product. Otherwise the risk or the hazard will be going to the consumer. So in such a case, if we have identified that there is a hazard that is still persistent and we are not able to control it, then destroying the product, that we feel that the end product will definitely have this hazard, then there is destroying of the product. These are some of the corrective actions. Then verification procedures. So verification procedures are those activities other than monitoring CCPs that verify the Haccp plan and show the system is operating according to the plan. So this is usually completed when a system fails or there is a significant change in the product or process. So we know that there is a change in the product or process and we need to verify it with the flow diagram. So in such a case also we have to do the verification. So annual checks will often still be in place even if these two scenarios does not occur. And the last principle of Haccp is record keeping procedures. So record keeping is very important, and documentation and record keeping helps to demonstrate the effective implementation of the previous principles of Haccp. So this records could be of the development of the Haccp plan, while the CCP monitoring or the corrective actions or verification activities that are done. The different types of Haccp records can be: first, the Haccp, while preparing the Haccp plan and the support documents that are used in developing the plan. So there are different types of Haccp records. First is the documentation that is done regarding preparation of the Haccp plan, then the records of the CCP monitoring, the records of corrective actions, and the records of verification activities. So once we have applied all the principles or we have implemented all the principles of Haccp, we even need to review the Haccp. So the design and running of the Haccp scheme should be revised whenever the food operation is altered. Also, the scheme should be reviewed from time to time, at least once in a year, even if there have been no alterations. So let's conclude by saying that Haccp is designed for use in all segments of the food industry, from growing, harvesting, processing, manufacturing, distributing, and even merchandising to prepare the food for consumption. Prerequisite programs such as current good manufacturing practices are an essential foundation for the development and implementation of successful Haccp plans. The 7 principles of Haccp have been universally accepted by government agencies, trade associations, and the food industries around the world. These are some of the references for advanced reading on the same topic. Thank you.